Good to go. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Bottom Line podcast. I'm your host, Beth Lindop, and I'm joined by Reach PLC's Business of Football writer, Dave Powell. How are we, Dave?
Very well, thank you, Beth. Yeah, it's our first time, this was said before, it's kind of meeting the worlds in it, analysing our field and the Bottom Line podcast. But yeah, we'll have chat about FSG and France and Bordeaux's vineyards and all that, I'm sure.
You being caught up in Euros fever?
I wasn't until the 91st minute last night, and then I got well into it. But yeah, now I'll be properly on board now for Sunday, having been so dismissive of it for the past 3 weeks. But yeah, no, we're all Southgate's the one, isn't he? Apparently.
Before we dive into FSG and everything like that, just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, NordVPN. We're all big fans of them. Get on board with Nord is a saying that Joe Rimmer has coined and seems to be catching on in the Echo offices at least. So all the information of how to get involved with NordVPN is in the description. So to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. On to FSG then. Obviously the big headline at the moment is that FSG are in discussions to acquire a majority stake in French side Bordeaux. We know that they want to get sort of involved in this whole multi-club model thing. So just tell us a little bit about why are FSG looking at purchasing another club?
I think for a long time they weren't really that interested in buying another football club. All their assets are North American, say for Liverpool, and European football brings with it a different kind of fandom, different challenges. It's you only have to look across at some of the backlash which the likes of Blueco 22 or Chelsea's owners have had from acquiring Strasbourg. It can be fraught with kind of reputational risk, but obviously with Klopp leaving end of last season, and having known that for a little while prior, they wanted to try and get some strategy back in place for what the next phase of Liverpool looks like. And obviously one of the carrots they wanted to dangle to Michael Edwards was overseeing a number of clubs, or two initially. I mean, they're going to try to acquire one and then potentially more. And that was kind of what they used, because that was what he was looking for. He didn't want the same challenge he had at Liverpool previously. He wanted something different. But ultimately, the goal is to raise the kind of competitive nature of Liverpool, because in turn that raises revenues and makes it more valuable to FSG. So yeah, that's kind of where it's all stemmed from. So they would have looked for a long time into markets from South America to Europe. So about 2 or 3 years ago, they looked quite heavily into Brazil, because there was going to be a change of structure around leagues. They were looking at making a Brazilian Super League, and FSG thought it might be a good time to get involved and purchase one of the main, historic Brazilian football clubs. They looked at Cruzeiro and, among others, Palmeiras. But that never really happened, and that league didn't happen. That kind of idea is kind of dead in the water now. So they've moved back on that. But ultimately, everything's to benefit Liverpool. And they already own, one of the biggest football clubs in the world. And they don't want to, they're not looking to own another club of a similar stature. They are looking to try and acquire a team which they can change. They can use their operational expertise and improve. They can increase revenue streams, etc. But also one where they can do knowledge sharing between, from Liverpool, whether it's a style of play, whether it's the medical side of things, through to potentially, putting players there on loan, or just getting better access to talent in the French market. So there's a number of reasons why they're looking into it, but chiefly it's because Michael Edwards, they needed something to entice him to come back and lead something else. So obviously they've created this FSG International. The precursor to that was to all this was the creation of that. So Billy Hogan's the CEO of FSG International, and obviously when they created that company, everyone was like, "Why? There's only Liverpool that are, aren't on North American soil." And obviously that now is, the plan since then was to do more in Europe or South America. So that's where it stemmed from. Now Edwards has a chance to kind of oversee operationally another football club, as well as having that direct link back to Liverpool, and they get him in in their camp, as opposed to, I mean, there was some talk about him. He had so many suitors over the past couple of years, ever since he left Liverpool. Chelsea, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich were all rumoured to be looking at Manchester United, but Liverpool will feel, and FSG will feel that he's still their man. And they've also made some hires in Pedro Marquez from Benfica. Julian Ward's kind of gone over to the FSG side of things, having initially left. So it's to that end. It was a way of getting Michael Edwards to come back in, but also he thinks he can be kind of value additive, and this can be a thing which can benefit both FSG and Liverpool further on down the line.
Yeah, and you mentioned sort of FSG have looked at a variety of markets, a variety of different clubs. So what is it about Bordeaux in particular that is attractive to them?
Good vineyards, nice weather. No, it's there's the French market. I mean, you only have to look at Liverpool's transfer business, or either it's deals which have been concluded or deals which never happened. I mean, they're in at the moment, aren't they? Well, they'd like Lenny Yoro at Lille. Previously, they've been interested in Tchouaméni, who went to Real Madrid. Now, Tchouaméni's an ex-Bordeaux academy graduate. So the French market is quite unique. I mean, they have world-class academies across France. Mm-hmm. They have real top-level access to African talent, which comes into France. And there's these cities are kind of hotbed to talents. Whether it's Paris, whether it's Bordeaux, Marseille, elsewhere. There's these cities are they are hugely populated. They have access to talent, and it's a football mad country. And also, there isn't it isn't a million miles away in terms of style and culture from the UK either, in terms of if you're trying to develop some talent in France. I mean, there's been quite a steady stream in recent years of that. You don't really tend to get too many problems of someone kind of acclimating from the French league into English football and vice versa. So there's elements of that. They also look at things like demographics. I know when Redbird Capital bought Toulouse back in 2020, and obviously Redbird are minority stakeholders in FSG, they looked at demographics in terms of it was kind of a young demographic in the city, disposable income, etc., etc. So all that plays a part, but also from an FSG point of view, and we know how they like to look at the bottom line and try and find value wherever they can. Bordeaux are in a bit of a financial mess. So they were, back in 2018, 2019, they were on the verge of an acquisition by a US businessman called Joe DeGrossa. That never happened, but the people that lent money for that deal, so his company was GACP Sports. So the investment firm that lent that particular vehicle money for the deal was called King Street. That deal didn't happen, but then they ended up acquiring the team, this investment company, almost by kind of default. They didn't really want a team. They were accidental owners. So then they flipped it and sold it to another businessman, Gerard Lopez. But in the intervening years, we've had a global pandemic. Now, football was absolutely battered by the pandemic, because when you've got no fans coming into stadiums, commercial revenues dry up, everything like that, and there was such concern over, do we ever get back to major levels of kind of commercial revenue and fan interest again? There was major concerns, but at that time the French league had signed a multi-year deal with a firm called Media Pro, and it was a really, really lucrative deal, the likes of French football I'd never seen before. Football clubs started spending that money before they'd actually had it in their pockets, because it was a multi-year deal. So they're thinking, well, we're guaranteed XYZ media revenues over the next five years or so. Perfect. Within 6 months, Media Pro started defaulting on payments, and in the end, the deal was cut early, within a year, I think. That meant the French league had to go to market again, and then sold rights to Amazon, I think, which on Canal Plus, on hugely reduced terms. But these clubs have already spent a lot of that money. Mm-hmm. So, and in the meantime, they've acquired lots and lots and lots of debt. That debt's built up. I mean, Bordeaux were in administration in 2021, got relegated 2022. And it's just snowballed since then. Revenues fall off a cliff in League Two. in France compared to League One. I mean, they're not great in League One. I mean, because there's a huge kind of revenue disparity between the French league and the English Premier League, and etc. There's only really Paris Saint-Germain that can spend heavily, and there's reasons for that. So that's really where it's at. So at the moment, the Bordeaux are in a position whereby they have been provisionally relegated to the third tier, so the champion national. So from next season, they've got 2 weeks to prove to French football's financial ombudsman that they have a budget for next season, and that involves, so talks held on that on Tuesday. FSG representatives were there for that. So part of this package that they're trying to say we can be in League Two again next season is by having FSG as owners. So that's what they're working towards. So while this is all at an early stage, the reality is that they've got kind of 2 weeks to prove a workable plan and get a deal done, or at least the bones of a deal, and prove to kind of French football's governing body, or financial ombudsman, that they can afford to last the League Two season. Otherwise, they're relegated into the third tier. And for a club which, I mean, you mentioned before about why Bordeaux. I mean, they won the League One title in 2009, reached the quarterfinals of the Champions League in 2010. They've always been a fixture, certainly for me, of kind of the French football's aristocracy, I suppose. The major players in French football, it's always been Paris Saint-Germain, Marseille, Lyon, Bordeaux have always been up there, really. Look at some of the players they produced. Tchouameni in recent years, Jules Koundé, Zinedine Zidane played 150 odd games for Bordeaux, so they're not without significant history, and also they have a big fan base, fervent backing. They've got a phenomenal stadium, which is 45,000 capacity, built. It's only less than 10 years old. It's owned by the city council, which is another potential issue that FSG might want to resolve, because I mean, when stadiums are owned by local authorities, it can be quite, you're almost bound by what the local authority says you can do. Whereas I'm sure FSG would love to have another arena of 40,000 odd where they could host Taylor Swift concerts. I don't know, but that's kind of where they're at. So we're at this point in time where they've got a couple of weeks now to get a deal done for a major, a big club in France, which also has links to, they're an affiliated club of Newell's Old Boys, so the Argentinian side. So it gives you kind of another foot in the door in South American football, but also one which is going to be available for a song, really, because it's in dire straits, and that's when kind of smart business folk tend to acquire new things, is when the price point is pretty low. No one's buying it at a high point. So that's kind of where they're at.
Yeah, and one name that's come up a lot when you've been explaining all about why FSG are looking to acquire another club is Michael Edwards. When we sort of look at who's going to be leading this project with Bordeaux, who is it? Is it going to be Edwards? Is he going to be at the forefront of all of this for FSG?
Yeah, I mean, the head coach at the moment at Bordeaux is Albert Riera, who's of Liverpool law. But yeah, I mean, it will basically be a project which would be heavily led by Michael Edwards, Julian Ward, and Pedro Marquez. Operationally, I think it's going to require some heavy lifting, because it's a club which has been in terminal decline, well, what seemed like terminal decline for a few years now. So you are trying to change not only competitive fortunes but financial fortunes, and obviously that comes at a cost of, they'll be paying down a lot of debt, etc. But it's also trying to implement a whole new strategy across a football club and say, right, this is where we are, this is what we are. And I suppose it's easier to do that when you are at your lowest ebb and you're faced with third tier of French football, a club that was in quarterfinals of the Champions League and previous French champions. That's kind of an easy sell. So effectively, you're starting from their lowest ebb, trying to rebuild what was, and I think that's why Edwards really probably see this as a really intriguing prospect, because he's going to have carte blanche to do as he pleases with it. But I imagine the strategy and the structure of it all will closely align with what Liverpool have, and that kind of thing will feed through and bleed through. So they've already got kind of, when FSG bought Liverpool, one of the first things they did was they created they gave a couple of years really to the data analytics staff, Ian Graham, etc., to create all these data pipelines and harvest all this data, and unsure that they knew every facet of detail about every player they had, but also where they needed to add and what type of things they were looking for, which is why they eventually signed kind of Gini Wijnaldum and Zerdan Sakiri from clubs that were relegated. So that's Andy Robertson. So that's kind of, I imagine, that type of approach. I mean, they're not going to be. I mean, they don't spend heavily at Liverpool out of the realms of what the club earns. So it won't be a case of spending lots and lots of money to make Bordeaux successful. It'll be a case of almost mimicking what Liverpool do on a lesser scale and trying to build that up accretively over time.
Yeah, we might have some Bordeaux fans watching this podcast, but I imagine that most of the people watching it will be Liverpool fans, and they might be sat asking themselves, what does this mean for Liverpool? Will it benefit Liverpool? How does it benefit Liverpool? What's your take on that?
I've seen some suggestions that, I mean, I'm sure the public line is that they will operate independently and there'll be no crossover between the two. I mean, that's understandable, but in reality, the reason they're doing it is because... So, I mean, no owners love spending money apart from Todd Bowley. I mean, he's spending other people's money, to be fair. So there is... the transfer market's gone absolutely wild. And at a time when we are... we've got salary caps coming down the line, PSR, financial controls, PSR, bites harder, squad cost ratio rules for UEFA, all these controls in line to, clubs have got to try and figure where best to place significant amounts of money when they're in the transfer market. Now, the Moises Caicedo affair a couple of summers back, was it last summer? Mm-hmm. It feels like just everything just mesh like into one. Ago, yeah, it feels like a complete eternity ago. That was what, £111 million bid. That is the kind of thing they don't want to engage in again. I mean, they did it, and I think it was way out of the usual thing that FSG do, and that points sometimes to a fact of is the strategy working anymore? Mm-hmm. If you're just having to go toe to toe with these other clubs for the same price point, is it working anymore? Is what you were good at still what you're good at? Are you still the smartest people in the room, or are you just having to do what everyone else does? And I think when it gets to that point, that's when they would have looked to check out. But now this whole rowing back and doing FSG International and trying to do almost what Brighton have been quite successful at it. I mean, Tony Bloom's got Union Saint-Gilloise in Belgium. They're a successful team. They're the Champions League, Europa League this year. I'm not sure when they did the Champions League previous year. Like Karim Matoma played there. They've got access to a lot of access to Belgian talent. So Bart Verbruggen was in that system. So there is benefits to knowing markets and the kind of players that are coming up more closely, and having kind of FSG having actual boots on the ground and ownership of a team allows them to do that. I mean, Man City own Troyes. Well, not Man City. The City Football Group own Troyes. Chelsea's owners own Strasbourg. Everton's thankfully doomed owners 777 Partners own Red Star Paris, albeit to a far lesser degree of success than anyone else. So these relationships already exist in France. So you have access to kind of pools of talent, but Liverpool and FSG certainly don't want to be spending £111 million in the transfer market for a player which Brighton acquired for £4.5 million 3 years previous. They'll be looking at someone like Jules Koundé and thinking if we would have, or Tchouaméni, and thinking if we would have known about this player or had access to that market earlier, would we have saved, is that how we go? Because obviously, every club in England's got, every top club's got great academies, produces their own talent. I think you can look across most clubs in the Premier League and someone's produced a first team talent worth plenty of money, whether that's, Trent or Conor Bradley at Liverpool, or whether it's Evan Ferguson at Brighton, someone, or Lewis Miley at Newcastle. There's all sorts of players being produced, but having the ability to also tap into someone else's market and maybe, get first dibs on that. Something which has worked for kind of Red Bull through like Leipzig, Salzburg, FC Liefering, which they own. So it will be benefits like that. So do they get first dibs on acquiring a talent younger, for cheaper, earlier, or it could be that they've got a squad which needs serious they might have players that would benefit from a high pressure environment, like you could get at Bordeaux, in a similar style, away from the kind of magnifying glass of English football, and then placed in the French system where they could thrive. I mean, that's happened in the past where players have been able to kind of grow in the French league. So that's an option. So ultimately, though, I mean that it is done in the long term for Liverpool's, or certainly to aid Liverpool's benefit through acquiring better talent for cheaper prices. That's really where it all comes from.
Yeah, and you mentioned the amount of clubs and owners that now sort of dabble in multi-club ownership. It is now becoming a real factor, a real facet of modern football, isn't it? But it isn't always popular. Do you think there'll be any backlash from the Liverpool fan base towards this decision?
I don't think so much the Liverpool fan base, because the two won't really have too many touch points in terms from a Liverpool side. I think French. It's all the team that benefits is always. I mean, there's always going to be opposition from some fans to it, and I understand it because even for me, the idea. I don't like the idea of one group owning multiple teams, but that's just a personal take on it. There's nothing more to it than that, really. It's just if they're owned independently, fine, but I think the sharing of data and potential impact it has on getting a leg up in player trading maybe doesn't sit well with me, but I don't think I have a strong enough opinion on it to kind of take to the streets with banners or anything like that. But from the other side of it, if you're, say, a feeder club, or the kind of lesser party in a multi-club organisation, I imagine that you're feeling fairly. It's a strange way to be in. So I'm a Chester fan. So back in the mid to late 90s, Manchester City and were looking at acquiring Chester to be a feeder club, and there was quite fierce opposition to it. It wasn't the reason why it ended. I mean, it ended because we had no good players. But that was the ideas have been there for a long time. But it was really wasn't welcomed by Chester fans at the time, because you'd be seen as there's some pride to be had in creating your own players and being independent as well. People don't want to feel like they support. Well, now we support Bordeaux, but we must have an affinity to Liverpool because we're all in this, this one big happy family. So I imagine, and we've seen previously Strasbourg, the acquisition of them by Blueco 22 didn't go down particularly well. Didn't go down well at all. Then I said particularly didn't go well at all. Protests against that because they feel it's a loss of identity when you are owned by the owners of someone else who really, and you know truthfully that they have the value to the owners is far greater. I mean, the weight of it is far greater placed on the biggest team in the group and the one that sits at the top of the pyramid. So I imagine that there might be a bit of resistance. However, when you've got a club which is 2 weeks away from being relegated to the third tier, has fallen on the hardest of times that they've had in their history in recent years, there isn't a clutch of people coming in to buy the club and just pour money at it. That's not happening now, really, because French football largely is a loss-making entity unless you can make these teams successful on the pitch, and you have to do it within a tight cost controls. Toulouse have managed it. Obviously, Redbird bought Toulouse in 2020. They got promoted from League 2 to League 1 2 years ago, and then they made Europa League last year and they beat Liverpool. And they're on the rise, so I imagine that Redbird in a few years will probably look to exit that. But but for Bordeaux fans, they're probably thinking, well, what's the other options we've got here? Is it, do we just continue to fall, continue to be swallowed by debt? Do you run the risk of losing the club altogether, or do you try and make the best of what the situation would be and say, well, yeah, okay, well, maybe we get access to good young Liverpool players, or maybe, yeah, we might have to sell top talent to, we might lose them to Liverpool in the future, but they're always going to lose that talent anyway. It doesn't matter whether it's to Liverpool, whether it's to Real Madrid, no smaller club is ever holding on to top talent, so it's a fallacy to think that they ever would. But I think in terms of an identity thing, I think it might bite. It might see a little bit of backlash, but I don't think it will be to the extent of maybe what Strasbourg have.
Yeah, and obviously Bordeaux look to be, they are the first club that the FSG are targeting. But do you think that will be the end of the the multi-club ambitions, or do you think it is just a starting point from which they will then look to look into other markets as well?
I think it'll be the last one they buy this year, and then yeah, I mean, it's. I think a lot of it will depend on how early doors, how much success they get, and how much operational kind of how much heavy lifting there is to do for a team. Because when you buy these teams, in reality, you're gonna have your payroll increase. You've got more and more people trying to turn these things around. But I do think they'd like a foothold in the South American market. Maybe they feel like they have that with the Newell's Old Boy link. I don't know, or maybe they feel like they might want to revisit the Brazilian leagues. But things like the Japanese league offers some interesting proposals, because I mean you only have to look at there's kind of really been a kind of a large surge of talent which has come over to Europe. I mentioned Matoma before. Obviously we've got Wataru Endo, who's his career began in Japanese football. Obviously had a long period of time in Stuttgart, and that kind of turned him into the player he is. So that type of thing would be maybe on the horizon. Everything's to do with cost. So I mentioned it in previous podcasts I've done. So the buying teams in North America is, yes, you have greater security over cost. So you have a salary cap. You have you have greater cost controls. There is no promotion. There's no relegation. So all that means that you have a draft system, which effectively promotes equilibrium and competitive balance at the end of every season. So that exists in the MLS, it exists in the NBA, NFL, NHL. The NWSL, so the Women's Major League over there, is booming right now, and valuations are absolutely skyrocketing. So I think Angel City, their valuation's kind of north of like 300 million now, and given the fact the team's only very few years old, it's quite staggering really. So that's all these things are really expensive to acquire in North America. In Europe, I think you're probably looking at, to acquire Bordeaux, you're probably looking at a price point of less than 25 million euros. But you're taking on a lot of debt, a lot of risk. So I imagine they'll see how this goes early doors, whether they find any benefit in the first 12, 18 months, and then look to maybe do another one. I don't think they really have the appetite to go as deep into it as a City Football Group do. But even when you look at that, I mean, they've got teams they have New York City FC. Maybe they look at an expansion franchise in the MLS. I don't know, but all the major markets are pretty much taken. There isn't a team in Boston, so I don't know. Maybe that's one.
Keep an eye on.
Yeah, the Boston Celtics are up for sale as well now. But yeah, so I don't think they have plans to go as deep as that. Whereas City Football Group also have kind of uniformity across what the kits look like, sponsorship, everything. That's another thing which you can potentially sell in if you're a club. If you've got a major sponsor and say you're selling in sponsorship to both Liverpool and Bordeaux, I mean that's potentially valuable. However, I don't think that'll be the case. I think those type of things will remain completely independent. I think there'll just be a simpatico relationship that exists as and when it's needed to, and it gives FSG a real foothold in a fantastic transfer market. And if it's a success, then I imagine South America probably is a viable destination. Big clubs, high pressure atmospheres, big fan bases, cheap prices, absolute hotbed of talent. So all these things tick a lot of boxes. They're coming into it quite late through now, because it's not multi-club ownership isn't a new phenomenon. It's been going for quite a while. But I think they probably feel that if they're going to try and stay competitive in the transfer market, they need to revisit who they are, because they don't want to be engaging in £100 million deals again anytime soon. I'm sure fans would love that to be the case, but I think we're going to start seeing those type of deals roll back over time as less and less people have the kind of money to throw around with financial controls. And so it is about working smarter, and I think we'll start to see a change in the transfer market over time.
Yeah, I mean, you'll be across all of this. You'll be across all FSG related things, across all Premier League related things. So if people want to sort of keep abreast of this whole situation, how do they find you? How do they sort of keep abreast of all of your work?
Well, there's a dedicated Substack page to the bottom line, which you can visit. The details will be in the link for this podcast. But yeah, it just covers across all matters of football finance, football governance, anything which relates to anything off the pitch. We kind of cover in interviews, opinion, all sorts. Just covers the whole breadth of it without. We don't really talk about transfers, so that's going to see people unsubscribing as we speak. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at. So bottom line on Substack, but yeah, subscriptions are welcome.
Well, thank you very much. I feel like I've learned a lot today about multi-club ownership that I didn't know. Hopefully everyone watching feels the same. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back soon on the Blood Red channel with another podcast, so keep your eyes peeled. But thank you very much. Thanks, Dave, and we'll see you soon.